Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story: The haunted house in Atchison. The summer of 1993 was sweltering. David and Lynn, a hopeful young couple, had just moved into an old, two-story house on a quiet street in Atchison, Kansas. They had bought it for a bargain price. A fresh start, a miniature American dream. The house, though old, had a certain charm, with its wide porch and windows overlooking a slightly overgrown garden. Lynn, pregnant with their first child, had already begun planning the nursery, choosing paint colors, selecting curtains. David, meanwhile, was busy with minor repairs, trying to turn this place into a real home. The first few days passed peacefully, filled with laughter and excitement. But the joy didn't last long. Just a few weeks after moving in, strange things began to happen. Small things at first, but enough to raise eyebrows. First came the strange noises at night, rattling sounds from the attic, soft footsteps in the upstairs hallway, even though they knew for sure only the two of them were home. David, initially, brushed it off, blaming it on the old house settling, or perhaps mice nesting somewhere. It's probably just the house settling. Honey, he reassured Lynn, old houses make noises. It's normal. Lynn tried to believe her husband, but a vague sense of unease crept into her mind. Then, things became clearer. Objects started moving inexplicably. Keys left on the kitchen counter would be found on the floor the next morning. The book Lynn was reading on the sofa would suddenly fall to the ground without a sound. Once, while David was watching TV alone in the living room, the remote control suddenly flew off the coffee table, hitting the opposite wall. He jumped, spun around, but no one was there. The air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. An unusual, unnatural chill, not like the cold from the air conditioner. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Especially for Lynn, when home alone, she often felt as if someone was standing right behind her. Cold breath on the back of her neck. She'd turn around, and no one was there. Shadows flickering in the corner of her eye became more frequent, disappearing the moment she tried to look directly at them. Lynn started losing sleep, terrified to be alone in her own home. She told David, her voice trembling, "I'm scared. David, I feel something's really wrong." David held his wife. He too was beginning to feel something wasn't right, but he tried to stay strong. One evening, as Lynn was preparing dinner in the kitchen, she heard the sound of a child giggling, echoing from upstairs, from the room they planned for the baby. The giggle was clear, yet it sent chills down her spine. She called David's name loudly, but there was no answer. He wasn't home yet. She slowly walked up the stairs, her heart pounding. The upstairs hallway was dark, with only faint light filtering through the window. The giggling had stopped. She stood there, listening, only hearing her own heartbeat and ragged breath. The baby's room was empty. Cold. Nothing was there. But she knew. She was certain. She had heard that giggle. That night, neither of them could sleep. The strange noises resumed, this time seemingly louder, clearer. The sound of furniture being dragged across the attic floor. Soft but persistent knocking on their bedroom door. David jumped out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and checked the entire house, but found nothing unusual, only heavy silence and the familiar chill. He returned to the bedroom, looking at Lynn huddled on the bed, her face pale with fear. "Maybe," he whispered, his voice full of uncertainty. "Maybe we made a mistake buying this house." Things got worse when electronic devices started malfunctioning inexplicably. Lights would turn on and off repeatedly, even after they replaced the bulbs. The TV would automatically change channels or blast the volume to maximum in the middle of the night, jolting them awake. The kitchen radio would suddenly turn on, emitting static and interference, sometimes mixed with unintelligible whispers. David, ever the practical one, checked the wiring system, but everything was normal. He couldn't explain these phenomena. One afternoon, while arranging things in the baby's room, Lynn felt a sudden cold draft sweep past. Even though the window was closed, the toys hanging over the crib began to sway gently, then more vigorously, as if an unseen hand was pushing them. She froze, eyes wide with terror. Then, an old rag doll she had found in a closet suddenly fell from the shelf, landing face up on the floor, its empty glass eyes seeming to stare right at her. Lynn screamed and ran out of the room, tears streaming down her face. She didn't dare go back there alone again. The strange phenomena were no longer just bothersome, they began to become more frightening, more personal. Lynn frequently saw dark shadows flitting through the house, not just in the corner of her eye but sometimes clearly visible for a few seconds before vanishing. Once, while looking in the bathroom mirror, she saw the faint reflection of a woman standing behind her. She spun around, but no one was there. Her heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. That shadow, though fleeting, carried an air of gloom, hostility. David could no longer maintain his skepticism either. One night, while sleeping, he felt as if someone was forcefully pulling the blanket off him. He jolted awake, the room pitch black, but he clearly sensed another presence in the room. Something heavy, malevolent. He scrambled to turn on the light, but nothing was out of place. Only the blanket lay half on the floor. He looked over at Lynn. She was still fast asleep, perhaps exhausted from constant fear and lack of sleep. He sat there, in the dim glow of the nightlight, feeling helpless and terrified. The whispering became clearer, no longer just indistinct sounds. Sometimes, they heard their names being called by a cold, emotionless voice, even when only the two of them were home. Other times, it was the soft sobbing of a child, emanating from the empty nursery. But the most terrifying were the growls, the hateful, threatening words echoing from the dark corners of the house. "Get out!" A hoarse voice rasped from the hallway as David came home late from work. "You don't belong here." The temperature in the house fluctuated erratically. Certain areas would become suddenly icy cold, so cold they could see their breath, even on hot summer days. Other places would become uncomfortably hot, the air thick and suffocating. The room intended for the baby was particularly bad. It was always unnaturally cold. Lynn refused to enter it anymore, feeling a negative, heavy energy enveloping the room. One morning, Lynn discovered small scratches on her arm that she couldn't explain. They appeared after a night filled with nightmares, in which she dreamed of a cold, bony hand clawing at her. She showed David. Both were speechless. This was no longer just malicious pranks. It was starting to cause physical harm. Fear now turned into genuine terror. They were living with something invisible, and it was becoming increasingly aggressive. They started researching the history of the house, hoping to find an explanation for what was happening. The neighbors were reserved, tight-lipped, but eventually, an elderly woman living down the street revealed some vague information. She said the house had long been rumored to be haunted, that unpleasant things had happened there in the past, but she didn't specify what. "Many renters before you," she said, lowering her voice, "didn't stay long either. Their personal belongings began to disappear. only to reappear in strange places. Lynn's wedding ring vanished from the dressing table, only to be found days later inside the sugar jar in the kitchen. The photo of the couple on their bedside table was found turned face down every morning. These actions seemed intentional, aimed at harassing, provoking, and sowing unease in their minds. The peak of the escalation during this period occurred when David witnessed an undeniable phenomenon. He was working in the living room when he heard music coming from an old music box Lynn had bought at a flea market. That music box had been broken for a long time. Impossible to wind up, he slowly approached it, the eerie, tinkling melody growing louder. As he got closer, the music box lid suddenly slammed shut, the music abruptly stopping. Simultaneously, all the lights in the living room went out, plunging the room into darkness. David stood frozen, cold sweat prickling the back of his neck. He knew then, they were dealing with a real entity. The incidents were no longer limited to apparitions or noises but escalated to direct physical attacks, particularly targeting David. One evening, while watching TV, he suddenly felt a sharp, burning pain in his back. He quickly took off his shirt and asked Lynn to check. On his back were 3 long, red welts, as if attacked by claws. The wounds were real, bleeding slightly. Lynn burst into tears out of fear. There was no logical explanation. David was only wearing a thin t-shirt, and there was nothing sharp around him. Similar scratches began appearing more frequently on David's body, sometimes on his chest, arms, even his face. They appeared suddenly, without warning, accompanied by a burning pain and a chilling cold. David felt like he was being hunted, attacked by an invisible enemy. He became irritable, exhausted, and terrified. His initial skepticism had completely vanished, replaced by constant dread. He started to believe that some entity in the house was deliberately trying to harm him. Along with the physical attacks, they began to hear another voice. Clearer, more frequent, the voice of a little girl. This voice sometimes whined, calling, "Daddy," which made David's hair stand on end. Other times, it giggled playfully, running around the house, the pitter-patter of tiny feet echoing on the wooden floors. But sometimes, the voice turned angry, screaming, throwing things. Lynn recounted hearing the little girl's voice whispering from the nursery, "Leave me alone. This is my room." They delved deeper into the house's history and uncovered a tragic story. Decades ago, a little girl named Sally had lived in the house. She suffered from acute appendicitis. The doctor operated on her right there on the kitchen table, a practice not uncommon at the time. But rumor had it that he started the surgery before the anesthesia had fully taken effect. Sally died in agony right there. Lynn and David shuddered hearing the story. Could Sally's tormented spirit be the cause of these phenomena? Was she venting her anger on them? Especially David, whom she mistook for the one who caused her pain. Events increasingly centered around the nursery. Toys moved on their own, sometimes thrown violently against the walls. The crib would swing violently by itself. Once, David and Lynn found all the furniture in the room arranged in a strange circle in the middle of the floor. On the walls, crude drawings appeared, seemingly made with chalk or charcoal, depicting distorted faces and incomprehensible writings. The air in the room was always unnaturally cold and heavy. Small fires began to break out spontaneously. A kitchen towel caught fire when no one was near it. A stack of old newspapers in the living room corner suddenly ignited. Fortunately, David and Lynn always discovered them in time and extinguished them before serious damage occurred. but the fear of a house fire constantly loomed over them. It seemed the force in the house was trying every means to drive them away. Or worse, harm them. In a desperate attempt, David tried to communicate with the entity. He stood in the middle of the living room, his voice trembling. "Sally? Is that you? We don't want to hurt you. We just want to live in peace." The response was a cold silence. Then suddenly, a picture frame on the wall crashed down, the glass shattering. A spiteful, malicious voice echoed from a dark corner. "Get out! Get out, all of you!" It wasn't the voice of a child. It was something else, older, darker. Lynn, weakened by pregnancy and extreme stress, began seeing clearer apparitions of Sally. The little girl would appear fleetingly at the end of the hallway, wearing an old white dress, her face pale, her empty eyes staring at Lynn. Sometimes, she would smile, a ghostly smile that chilled Lynn to the bone. Lynn felt a strange connection to this ghost, a mixture of pity and intense fear. She didn't know if Sally was seeking help or trying to warn them about something even more terrible. Unable to endure anymore, David and Lynn decided to seek outside help. They contacted a local paranormal investigation team who had heard about the house in Atchison. The team, consisting of 3 members, arrived one weekend evening with specialized equipment like electromagnetic field (EMF) meters, electronic voice phenomena (EVP) recorders, and infrared cameras. A tense atmosphere filled the air as they began setting up their equipment. From the moment they stepped inside, the devices started showing abnormal readings. EMF meters spiked erratically in certain areas, especially near the nursery and the kitchen area where Sally was said to have died. Recorders captured whispers and footsteps of unknown origin. Infrared cameras recorded orbs of light floating in the air and sudden cold spots appearing and disappearing. The investigators confirmed that the house definitely had strong paranormal activity. During an EVP session in the nursery, one team member asked, "Is anyone here with us? What is your name?" When they played back the recording, amidst the static, they heard a faint but clear child's voice, "Sally." This seemed to confirm the presence of the little girl's ghost. However, immediately after, another voice, hoarse and full of malice, snarled, "Get out of here." This voice sent shivers down everyone's spine. The investigators conducted a séance, attempting direct communication with the entities. They used an Ouija board, despite its controversy, and other methods. During the session, they received conflicting messages. At times, the planchette on the Ouija board moved, spelling out "Sally" and words like pain, doctor, cold, but interspersed were hateful messages, threats aimed at David, and obscenities. It seemed more than one entity was present in the house. A psychic accompanying the team, after walking through the house, offered a terrifying assessment. She sensed Sally's presence, a trapped and suffering child spirit. But she also sensed something else, something darker, stronger, and incredibly malevolent. This entity seemed to be using or manipulating Sally's spirit. "The little girl is only part of the problem," she told David and Lynn gravely. "There's something older, more dangerous lurking here. It hates men, and it's targeting you." David, Lynn, in her sensitive state due to pregnancy, seemed to sense this too. She recounted increasingly terrifying nightmares, seeing not only Sally but also a tall, shadowy figure, indistinct in shape, always lurking in the darkness, radiating intense fear and hatred. In her dreams, this dark figure seemed to dominate Sally, whispering in her ear, inciting her to do evil things. The investigators researched the history of the land before the house was built. They discovered rumors of strange rituals and unexplained deaths occurring on this land long ago. Was the house built on cursed ground? Had the dark entity existed here even before Sally? The truth seemed far more complex and frightening than just a single child ghost haunting the place. Before leaving, the investigators gave David and Lynn a serious warning. The activity here is very strong and shows dangerous signs. The team leader said, "That other entity seems very focused on David. You need to be extremely careful. We advise you to consider leaving this place. Especially with Lynn about to give birth." The warning was like a bucket of cold water on the couple's fragile hopes. Leave? Abandon the house they had poured their hearts and savings into? But what other choice did they have when their lives, and the life of their unborn child, were threatened? After the investigators left, the situation in the house didn't improve. Instead, it deteriorated rapidly. It seemed their presence and attempts at communication had agitated, even enraged, the entities lurking within. The house now felt like a spiritual battleground, and David and Lynn felt besieged from all sides. The physical attacks on David became fiercer and more frequent. He wasn't just scratched anymore, he was pushed by unseen forces. Had small objects thrown at him. Once, while walking downstairs, he felt a strong push on his back, nearly sending him tumbling down. He barely managed to grab the railing, his heart pounding like a drum. He felt a clear hostility, an intent to cause serious injury. Poltergeist activity reached its peak. Furniture was constantly rearranged, thrown violently against walls, or arranged into bizarre patterns. Doors and windows slammed shut or flew open violently. Day or night, the sounds of banging, screaming, and maniacal laughter echoed throughout the house, especially at night, making sleep impossible for David and Lynn. They lived in a state of extreme stress and fear, physically and mentally exhausted. Lynn, her pregnancy advancing, became the target of more subtle psychological torment. She frequently heard the sound of a baby crying desperately from the empty nursery, a sound that triggered her maternal instincts but also instilled terrifying fear. Sometimes, she felt a cold hand gently touch her belly while she slept. The images of Sally and the frightening dark figure appeared more often, not just in dreams but also during waking hours, keeping her in a constant state of panic. They tried inviting a priest to perform a house cleansing. The priest, after performing rituals and prayers, admitted he felt a strong evil presence. However, the blessing seemed to have only a temporary effect, perhaps even angering the dark entity further. As if challenged, right after the priest left, a crucifix hanging on the wall was thrown to the ground and shattered. Angry growls echoed through the house. In desperation, David tried a direct confrontation. He stood in the middle of the house, shouting into the darkness, "What do you want? Why are you doing this to us?" The response was a barrage of violent banging from upstairs, and a hate-filled voice screamed back, "Pain. Death. Get out." The living room door slammed shut, trapping him inside. He tried to open it, but the doorknob became unnaturally hot, burning his hand and forcing him to recoil. He felt trapped, helpless, and utterly alone in this fight. The relationship between David and Lynn began to fray under the immense pressure. Fear, sleep deprivation, and constant stress made them easily irritable with each other. David felt guilty for putting Lynn and their unborn child in this dangerous situation. Lynn was terrified for her husband's safety and worried about the baby in her womb. Their dream home had turned into a hellish prison, trapping them in terror. They tried leaving the house several times, staying temporarily with friends or in cheap motels. But each time, the strange phenomena seemed to follow them. Nightmares, the feeling of being watched. Even small scratches reappeared. Moreover, they couldn't just abandon all their belongings and the house they had invested in. They felt tied to this place, with no escape. One night, lying in bed, Lynn suddenly felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She looked down and was horrified to see a shadowy, dark hand pressing firmly on her belly through the blanket. She screamed hysterically. David jolted awake, but the hand vanished. The pain subsided, but the fear remained. They knew then that the entity in the house was no longer just targeting David. It was now threatening their unborn child. This was the final straw. After that terrifying night, with the life of their unborn child directly threatened, David and Lynn could endure no more. The decision was made quickly. Though painfully, they had to leave this house. Immediately. At any cost. Their family's safety came first. They could not continue gambling their lives and their child's life against the malevolent force residing in the house. Packing their belongings was done in a hurried and fearful atmosphere. They took only the bare essentials, clothes, personal documents, and a few small keepsakes. All the large furniture, the things they once cherished, were left behind. The house itself seemed to sense their departure. The banging and screaming intensified as never before. Like a final furious tantrum, doors slammed shut repeatedly. Objects flew wildly. Lights flickered manically. The air was thick with hostility. As they stepped out the door for the last time, David looked back at the house. In the dim moonlight, it looked gloomy and menacing. The dark windows like empty eye sockets. He felt as if the house was watching him back. A cold, haunting gaze. He shivered, quickly pulling Lynn towards the car. They drove away without looking back once, leaving behind the worst nightmare of their lives. They moved into a small apartment in another city. Trying to start over, Lynn gave birth to a healthy baby boy a few weeks later. But the psychological scars left by the house in Atchison never fully healed. Both were haunted by what they had experienced. They suffered frequent nightmares, startled by the smallest noises, and always felt a sense of unease. David still occasionally felt sharp pains where he had been scratched, even though there were no longer any wounds. Lynn lived with a subconscious fear that something evil was stalking her family. The house in Atchison, Kansas, after David and Lynn left, continued its notoriety as one of the most intensely haunted locations in America. Subsequent renters reported similar phenomena, strange noises, moving objects, the feeling of being watched, and particularly, scratches appearing on men's bodies. Numerous paranormal investigation teams visited, capturing extensive evidence of supernatural activity, further solidifying its terrifying reputation. The story of Sally and the dark entity continued to circulate. It is said that Sally's spirit remains trapped there, suffering and perhaps manipulated by a more sinister force. The entity that hates men still lurks in the darkness, waiting for its next victims. The house stands there, a chilling reminder of the existence of things science cannot explain, of the thin veil between our world and whatever lies beyond. David and Lynn's story is a cold warning that sometimes, cheap houses come with an invisible, much higher price. It also shows the extreme terror of confronting hostile supernatural forces. A battle where you cannot see the enemy, cannot understand its motives, and have nowhere to run. The house in Atchison still stands, a dark legacy, holding its own secrets and horrors, waiting I hope this story brought you some chilling and haunting moments. If you enjoyed true horror stories like this one, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for listening.